But you notice here a very interesting phrase. We left out the word apostle. But notice here we have Peter speaking, and Peter, as we know, was an apostle, one of the original 12. He is an apostle, but look at what he says here. He says, I who am a fellow elder. So now we have an apostle saying he is an elder. How do we explain this? Let's look at the difference between elder and apostle, the similarities and the difference. Let me show you here a couple of circles. Let me compare these with a couple of circles. Here at the top we're going to have the apostles in a smaller yellow circle. And then underneath that we're going to have a larger blue circle, which we are terming elders. An apostle, we have a little bit of an overlap between the yellow and the blue circles, a small overlap between apostles and elders. Well, an apostle is simply a special office in the New Testament. The word apostle means someone who is sent with orders. And it's a special role in the New Testament for a specific number of men, and we're going to talk about the number here in just a moment. But it was only an office that existed in the first century. And you notice that this special office has an overlap here with elders, and in 1 Peter 5:1, as we just showed, Peter says that he, as an apostle, was an elder. So there is a sense in which apostles were elders. Now let's just briefly comment on that. I think what he's saying here is that the apostles are just a special subset of elders. They were used for a specific mission at a specific time. They were elders, but they were also more than elders. And we start to see some of those differences, the way in which they were more than the elders, when we look a little bit more deeply at these two terms. Let's first look at the difference between apostles and elders in terms of the number of them. You remember the apostles, originally there were 13. Of course, there were 12. Judas killed himself, and Matthias replaced him, and then Paul came along just a little bit later by the direct ministry of Christ, so you ended up with 13. But 13 is all you had. There was a limited small number of apostles. But elders, there is really no limit to the number of elders that you can have. As we've talked about already, and we'll see here in a moment, there are supposed to be multiple elders in every church. So over the course of the life of the church, there have been hundreds of thousands, even millions of elders that have served in the churches, but there have only been a few apostles. But where we really start to see the difference, see how apostles are more than elders, is when we look and consider their spiritual giftings. So let's look at the gifts of apostles and elders. Now when we do that, we see this yellow circle that was smaller earlier compared to the blue elders circle. We see the yellow circle get much bigger, and we see the elder circle get much smaller. The apostle circle gets much bigger, and the elder circle gets much smaller. And what that is indicating is that the apostles were given a unique set of gifts, a greater number of gifts than your typical elder. You remember that the apostles were charged with starting the church from scratch. They had on the order of several hundred disciples at most. They had the Roman government against them. They had the Sanhedrin and the Jewish authorities against them. And they had this task of getting this church started from basically nothing. So to do that, they were given a greater number of gifts than normal Christian leaders. Consider Paul as an example. If you've ever read Paul's writings and you see the number of gifts, you see what kind of a man this was, you realize right away that when you're talking and you're reading about Paul and you're talking about Paul, you're finding someone who is far beyond most of us. You feel like you're talking to a guy on another level altogether. I mean, here is a preacher, a teacher, an evangelist, a missionary. He was an architect of church building and church expansion. Think about the gifts he had in suffering, the gifts he had in humility. I mean, this guy was something. But the point of fact is, Paul was really no different than me or you. Paul just needed those gifts, and Peter needed those gifts, and James needed those gifts because they were starting the church from scratch. They needed more than your average person. But after the apostles went into these churches and got them started, they set up elders in those churches who would then take over as time moved on. So following the death of the apostles, the church was led by elders who, while greatly gifted, did not possess the volume of gifts individually that the apostles had. And that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? That they didn't need this tremendous pile-on of gifts because things were changing, the church was being established. And so God did not want a single man in there with all of these great gifts. He wanted multiple men in there who had different gifts, smaller amounts of gifts, great gifts indeed, but not this tremendous number of gifts that were piled onto the apostles. And when we go through this a little bit later and we talk about the wisdom of Christ in establishing multiple elders and multiple pastors, one of the reasons that we're going to see is because of this gifting issue, that we need multiple pastors because we need to add all of these gifts together in order for the churches to be led and to be profitable and to prosper. So we'll see that here in a moment. But that's really the difference between elder and apostle. An apostle is a special type of elder, if you will, and those gifts are past now, and now we have elders in the churches.